Counter-Narrative News, bringing you daily news today on Thursday, the 16th of March 2023. Going to the Australia, Britain and US alliance, the AUKUS alliance, that's initiated this new militarist approach around nuclear submarines. That's going to be apparently hosted in Australia, although Australia doesn't have the capacity. It's led to a massive fallout of recriminations around it, not least by the former Australian Prime Minister Paul Keating, who was Australia's Prime Minister in the early 90s, who privatised a whole bunch of Australian public assets, but also was tied closely to the Chinese leadership, serving as a board member for the Chinese Development Bank. He has scathingly denounced this militarist posture against China is as utter foolishness, using very typically colourful language that is his signature speaking style. But in so doing, he's just really quite clearly exposed the holes in the whole strategy. But, Chinese leadership cannot buy the Western white man, as it were, into loyalty towards Beijing. Ultimately, the Western white man, particularly those who are rich and at the top of the capitalist hierarchy, will stay loyal to their own and to their own system against a global competitor, which is China. So the point being is that Paul Keating can come out with whatever rhetoric he wants, and to a certain extent it's helpful to expose the growing warpath on China. However, it's very limited at the same time. The only real mainstays of ensuring world peace is a leadership of those states attacked that can match that aggression by a counter-response, mobilizing the masses in its own interests, and also the grassroots around the world who have to pressure towards peaceful resolutions of these growing conflicts, of which there is no real anti-war leadership of that type. So that's a challenge that has to be built. Going to Syria and Palestine and Russia, both the president of Syria, the far-right leader of a far-right state, that's President Assad, has visited his senior white nationalist leader, to which he's the junior, that is Putin, and has typically, in quite embarrassing fashion, lacking any self-respect and self-dignity for the Syrian people and nation, has basically said, Putin, you can make as many military bases on Syrian soil as you want. It doesn't matter that Russia, Turkey, NATO and the USA has bombed Syria together at Putin's invitation, and Putin has accommodated the two partitions of Syria, one by Turkey in one part of northern Syria, another by the US occupation forces in another part of Syria. It's just a very sad state of affairs that Syria has allowed itself to be in such an embarrassingly inferior position, but that's what happens when you internalize white nationalism to that extent. And also, Saleh al-Aruri, who is part of the political bureau of Hamas, has also visited Moscow recently. And this is all around the way in which Russia is hugging Turkey closer in a strategic approach, especially in relation to Syria, but also in relation to Iran and other parts of the region as well. So a very senior spokesperson for Putin, a de facto Russian state leader, Alexander Dugin, who's a global white nationalist racist leader, has overtly come out in favor of Erdogan in the impending coming Turkish elections. And he said he's happy to sacrifice the Kurds in the region for his loyalty to Erdogan. And he sees the alliance with Turkey reflective of the Russian whole policy, the Russian scam with NATO, Israel and the West in relation to Syria and Turkey. Dugin sees it in much more important that relations are developed with Turkey, and it doesn't quite fit with Iran. And Dugin even mentions that in an opinion piece recently. Also connected to this, the Syrian armed opposition and rebel forces have commemorated 12 years since the outbreak of the Syrian conflict, in which they, in coordination with NATO and Turkey and its regional alliances, picked up weapons in an opposition movement towards Syria. And the Syrian state itself reacted very brutally, really sparking a whole cycle of conflict that has killed some 500,000 people, displaced many internally, and created a refugee flow, which has been weaponized again by the West and the East in an anti-migrant racist posture, most recently by President Kais Saied of Tunisia. Just a very sorry state of affairs in Syria this last decade, plus 12 years of it, really. And one has to reflect, on the one hand, the nature of the supremacist death squads that NATO and allied forces in the region have unleashed in Syria, not least in the recruitment of young Muslim people, Shamima Begum being an infamous case in that regard, who was groomed as a young girl, but also Muazzam Beg, who openly boasted that MI6 gave him the green light to train death squads, i.e. British proxies, to which he admits they're British proxies in Syria as well. Just a very sad state of affairs. You have a far-right state allied to the global racist movement, that's the Syrian state, and then you have another bunch of white supremacists who are conducting a conflict between these two. What can one say? And finally, again connected to the region, going to Palestine, another further 4 martyrs in Jenin, as the white supremacist colonial occupation forces have conducted another violent assault, killing 4, including at least 2 members of the Palestinian resistance there. Before we go, we'd like to signpost you to a whole bunch of things. We have added another series now, the 3-part series on the anti-war movement, 20 years since the invasion and occupation of Iraq, back in March 15, 2003. Please have a look at that. Also, we have a commentary of why Brenton Tarrant, who was the Christchurch Nazi shooter in New Zealand, who on March the 15th back in 2019, why did he say that China was his favourite political state in the world? So some critical reflections around that as well, and some other products on our YouTube channel. So please do encourage your friends and your contacts to subscribe to our YouTube channels, sharing our videos, liking and commenting, and giving us feedback and criticisms. We wish you the very best. Thank you.